Speed. America's always had a love affair with speed. It all started here, the Daytona Beach, Florida area. The birth and rise of NASCAR into a motorsport phenomenon was a uniquely American, if improbable, rags to riches story. Carved from the white sands of Daytona and the humble red dirt clay of the southern Piedmont by one very determined man, commanding a roving band of rebels and outlaws. The dawn of the automobile age struck like thunder at the turn of the 20th century, igniting an insatiable fascination for speed throughout the United States. By 1903, adventurous and wealthy sportsmen who could afford to build the latest high-speed contraptions wintered each February in Daytona, where they tested both their courage and skill at nearby Ormond Beach in good-natured but daring duels. The American Automobile Association, or AAA, a new motoring club, soon began to certify the results of the annual speed trials. But while the upper class raced their one-of-a-kind open-wheel creations, the American working class was creating a racing league of its own. Shortly after the first mass-produced, or stock Model T, was introduced in 1908, Midwesterners stripped off the fenders of Henry Ford's invention and went racing on small farms and fairground horse tracks.
It became, well, who's got the fastest car? Well, they had to settle that, so they built them a racetrack out in the dirt, and who had the fastest car, who was the better driver. And pretty soon somebody came up with the idea, well, let's sell tickets, because maybe somebody wants to see this, because I would imagine it's pretty doggone exciting.
With the roaring 1920s, stock car racing continued to grow in popularity among the American hard-working people, spreading beyond the Midwest to every region in the United States. But the glamorous motorsport establishment, led by AAA, snubbed the simple stock cars in favor of the more sophisticated open-wheel race cars.
It's the exclusive Firestone gum-dipping process.
The AAA Contest Board had begun endorsing what would become the most famous open-wheel race in the world, a 500-mile event at the Indianapolis Speedway. The winter event at Ormond Beach was now a highly publicized attraction, establishing the official world land speed record. But the affair was no longer the domain of a privileged few.
Sir Henry Seagrave, a fellow Englishman, had skill and iron nerves. Most important, he had the 1,000-horsepower Sunbeam.
A rapidly increasing number of curious stock car racing fans were traveling to Florida each year to watch the spectacle, which reached its zenith in the 1930s with thrilling competition between gentleman racers Sir Henry Seagrave and Sir Malcolm Campbell. In 1935, Campbell blistered the beach at over 276 miles per hour, but the record-setting runs would not last. The unstable sands of the beach made the competition too dangerous, and the event was moved to the barren salt flats of Utah. The financial loss was a huge blow to the city of Daytona Beach, which was heavily reliant upon the festival for its tourism dollars. To offset the loss of the speed tournament, Daytona Beach officials in 1936 hastily constructed a 3.2-mile beach road course, the unique yet untested track, shaped like a paperclip, connected Daytona's city streets to the beach of the Atlantic Ocean. Thousands of spectators turned out to watch the first two races in 1936 and 37, the first organized stock car events in history. In both races, nearly half of the competitors did not finish because the deep sand in the turns swallowed their heavy stock cars. Despite the turnout, the city lost thousands of dollars. For the 1938 race, desperate city officials asked driver and mechanic Bill France to organize the event. France had shown his savvy by driving his lightweight Ford coupe to a top finish in the first race in '36.
He could see right off the bat, and he was in some of those events, that some more organization needed to be put together.
The tall, lanky France, who had recently moved his young family to Daytona Beach from Washington, D.C., learned his skills while racing the family car on steeply banked board tracks in nearby Maryland. France jumped at the challenge and set himself on a course that would forever change his life.
In the sixth time around, the field has already diminished considerably due to engine failure.
Embarrassed by the earlier failures, AAA flatly refused to endorse France's race, permanently dismissing the common stocks as nothing more than a third-rate joyride for the working class.
Over 50 qualifying cars are lined up in handicap position, awaiting the starting signal that'll send them hurtling over the wind-swept Florida beaches.
The young promoter plunged ahead anyway, determined to make his event a winner. For better traction, he put a special clay in the corners and shortened the race. France displayed a sharp talent for publicity, attracting thousands of spectators. The motley collection of competitors, many of whom were thrill-seeking moonshiners, excited the crowd with their show-stopping antics in a race that came off without a glitch. Miraculously, the first-time promoter turned a profit. With success under his belt, France vowed to prove that AAA was mistaken in their opinion of stock car racing.
Automobile racing has always been popular in the South, long before NASCAR was formed, long before Bill France ever started driving. When the moonshiners started to argue about whose car was better, and they took them out to a racetrack to see if mine was better than yours, these were our guys that are out there racing. And that's what captured the fancy of the people, as opposed to having a bunch of visitors from other sections of the country with highly specialized cars coming.
During the early 1920s, profits from Prohibition flowed like water from a clear mountain stream to bootleggers in the Carolinas, Georgia, and the Virginias, Southern whiskey trippers who had plenty of practice driving on switchback mountain roads, outfitted their Ford coupes with specialized parts and went racing. Shade Tree Mechanics soon joined the outlaw bootleggers when the inexpensive yet powerful Ford flathead engine became more widely available in the 1930s. Anyone with modest mechanical skills could rescue a flathead from the junk heap and rebuild it for racing. Speed spread like gossip through the small, rural hamlets of the southern Piedmont.
W.J. Cash, he was a famous journalist who wrote a book called The Mind of the South, tracing it really back into the 19th century. And how in the South, there developed this culture built around what he called the hell of a fella, who was the kind of guy who would spontaneously break into foot races, yell out loud, drink as much whiskey as he could possibly hold, doing all sorts of wild stuff. And this became really a mark of manhood for many young men in the South to act like this. When the automobile comes along, it offers them an outlet to express that. So people go into street racing, and then once the tracks grow up, into racing itself. The Piedmont region is the fertile crescent, I guess you would say, of stock car racing, partly because of these cultural values that were so important.
Nowhere was this cultural phenomenon more evident than just outside Atlanta, Georgia. Bootleggers rushed from the North Georgia hills to run at the first organized track in the southern part of the United States, Lakewood Speedway, rightly earning its nickname, the Indianapolis of the South.
We had some showmen back in those days. I mean, sure enough, showmen. At Lakewood, when they come down that chute running over 100 miles an hour, they'd cross a car right in front of the grandstand and stand on it for all it's worth. It was a sight to behold.
Lakewood Speedway, in combination with the prosperous Georgia moonshine business, produced a steady stream of young daredevils, establishing the building block of early stock car racing. The track's influence was so widespread that local garages, ready and willing to supply daring drivers with the tools of their trade, sprung up on nearly every corner in downtown Atlanta.
Anybody driving could always get a car to drive. If he didn't own his own, somebody'd be thrilled to death to get one, because usually it kills somebody about once a week, and they didn't have any safety measures in.
It was so dusty, in fact, I'd look at the trees and count 1, 2, 3 and keep looking to the left for the guardrail to know where I was on the track. You couldn't see where you were going.
Along with Langhorne Speedway outside Philadelphia, the 1 Mile Georgia dirt track hosted the most significant early stock car races on the East Coast. Lakewood's 18,000-seat grandstand generated handsome prize money, attracting the two most outrageous bootleggers of the day, cousins Rebel Roy Hall and Lloyd C.
Those guys got sharpened their talents by running on the back roads of Georgia and usually outrunning their revenues or whoever was pursuing them. And that was a race you had to win.
In 1938, Lakewood promoted an event they hailed as the National Championship Stock Car Race. The 18-year-old prodigy, C, won the race in a 1934 Ford supplied by another cousin, the dapper and dashing Raymond Parks, owner of the Hemp Hill service station in downtown Atlanta. Hall, who's alleged to have piloted the getaway cars in several bank robberies, just might have been the most talented of the Georgia drivers. But the hell-raising bootlegger lost too much track time, evading the revenuers who were always hot on his tail. He never minded an overnight in jail, for it was a free bed and a free meal. Parks supplied his cousins with 2 brand-new Ford Coupes to drive at Bill France's 1939 Daytona Beach race, making Parks the first multi-car owner in stock car racing history.
But if you got to drive one of his cars, you were in hog heaven, really.
Raymond Parks, a very quiet individual, always well-mannered, well-dressed, and a lot of people wanted to copy after him. And if you could outrun some of the drivers that raced with for Raymond Parks, you had really done something without any doubt about it. In my opinion, the talk was right here in Atlanta when it first started about NASCAR.
Twisting the wrenches for Parks was the brilliant Louis Red Vogt, the finest stock car mechanic of his era. Vogt's garage in downtown Atlanta supplied customers on both sides of the law, but he preferred supplying the whiskey runners because they paid in cash on the spot, while the checks to the revenuers were slow to arrive from Washington, D.C.
There were some revenuers that were just as famous for their driving as some of the moonshiners were. He would build these guys these moonshine cars for a certain route from Dawsonville to Atlanta. He built a special car for these people.
By 1940, France and the spectacular Georgians were stars on the Southern racing circuit, a disorganized and corrupt collection of races run on old dirt horse tracks, better suited for beasts than men. On the strength of 2 wins, France was declared the national stock car champion in 1940, though there was no formal point system to verify the title. He also continued to promote races on the beach. Big Bill's reputation for honesty spread among the drivers, who rewarded him by showing up on time at his Daytona races, entertaining the crowd with legendary style. In 1941, Lloyd C. flipped his car twice at the beach and still managed to finish 4th, taking the checkered flag riding on just 2 wheels. 3 years later, the young driver was shot dead by his cousin Woodrow Anderson in an argument over moonshine. Just as Bill France's outfit was hitting its stride, the United States entered World War II, ending auto racing of any kind in America. All of America's resources, both human and material, were put towards the war. France joined the cause as an engine foreman in a Daytona shipyard. The racing engines were silent in America from 1942 to 1945. But that instantly changed the day America triumphed in World War II. Americans, proud but weary, were ready to move on with their lives. They filled the grandstands of many spectator sports, but especially auto racing, now called America's sport, because of its dangerous nature and spirit of adventure. In the first race in 1945, Rebel Roy Hall edged past Bill France to win a 75-mile thriller at Lakewood. The Parks boat team won 4 straight races on the beach from 1946 to 49. Atlanta native Eddie Samples was recognized as the national champion in 1946. Another Georgian, Gober Sosby, won 3 straight modified races on the beach. Raymond Parks added Red Byron and the fabulous Flying Flock brothers, Bob and Fontarello, to his stable of drivers. The talented brothers were the oldest members of the first family effort in stock car racing, the Daredevil Flocks.
How long have you been in the racing business, Fonty? Since 1938.
Bob and the flashy Fonty got their start in bootlegging at the urging of their mother, the widowed Big Mama Flock, who had struggled to feed her family working at a hosiery mill.
What's your mother think about all this?
Well, my mother's got gray hair.
Well, I don't wonder. Well, I certainly would like to.
My mother's interested. She's here.
Oh, she's here, Mom. Oh, come in here, Mother. What do you think about all this?
I think they're wonderful, huh?
Do you?
Yeah, I just keep my fingers crossed.
The brothers ran whiskey for their uncle Peachtree Williams, who was one of Atlanta's most prosperous moonshiners. The Atlanta Police Department could never capture bail jumper Bob, so city officials passed an ordinance stating that no one could compete at Lakewood if they had a case pending in the Atlanta courts. Racing under an alias, Bob snuck into one race. The police had arranged a dragnet to capture the wily driver after the race, but Bob, as usual, was one step ahead of the law.
When you go down the front straightaway at Lakewood, there's a little short driveway type thing that goes right out to the road, and he just went right out that way and hit the road and took off, and the police took off after him. They never did catch him.
Adventure was not limited to the Flock brothers. Sisters Rio and Ethel were just as high-flying as their brothers. Rio was an accomplished motorcycle racer who often wore a 6-shooter pistol at her side. She was one of America's first female biplane wing walkers. Sister Ethel Flock later joined the stock car racing circuit, becoming one of the very first female racers in Bill France's venture. But it was the youngest Flock, Tim, who would later establish some of the most enduring achievements in NASCAR history. In 1946, France quit driving to devote full attention to promoting, as he now had stiff competition from other racing organizations. He expanded his racing operation to small tracks throughout the South, and he even dreamed of the day he would take his show nationwide. In a chance meeting with the cantankerous Charlotte newspaperman Wilton Garrison, France was offered some advice that would help him distance his operation from rivals and mark a crucial turning point in stock car racing history. France went to Garrison seeking press coverage for an upcoming race. The young promoter claimed his race would decide the national champion that year. Garrison point-blank asked him how he could make such a statement.
And they finally asked him, to answer your question, what do you think we need to do? And he says, well, you need to have records. You need to keep track of who did what, the score, like baseball does. So a point system was added to establish the championship for the following year. And we've had a championship ever since.
Garrison also suggested France create a series of races where the rules were consistently the same and regularly enforced. He also recommended France turn to his old nemesis, AAA, for organizational support.
He went to the 3A, which was the paramount sanction organization at that time. They came off of the Indianapolis 500, was their biggest event. And they told him they weren't interested in it. The term was, we're only interested in the big stuff.
This fresh insult by the sanctioning body, similar to the one France endured in 1938, both haunted and motivated Big Bill France throughout his early years as a promoter. AAA had a stranglehold on many of the sport's most profitable venues, so the rejection meant France would have to, for the most part, limit his promotion to tracks throughout the South. In 1947, France rebounded with willful confidence, announcing he would direct a series of races, not just one race at a time. France's promotional slogan for the new series was, "Where the fastest that run the fastest." France welcomed back to his new series the returning war veterans, many of whom brought home crucial knowledge in mechanics, aerodynamics, and battlefield experience that they would apply to racing. Furthermore, the brave, adrenaline-fueled, hell of a fella nature of the Southern drivers and mechanics and owners had made them very courageous soldiers.
They know that to get where you have to go, you have to give more than 100%. You can't just sit there and let things happen. You have to make something happen. And that's what these guys from the South did. When they went to Europe, they wanted to come home. They knew they had to get through with things before they could come home. You weren't going to come home till the war was over or you were in a body bag.
Growing up on his family's Spartanburg, South Carolina farm in the 1930s, Walter Bud Moore sharpened his natural gift for mechanics by repairing old farm machinery. On carefree Sunday afternoons, Moore and his 6 brothers stiffened the suspensions and doctored the engines of old Model T Fords and went racing.